We'll start by settling, establishing our motivation. So again, as we do, we generate the minds of confidence in the Buddha's wisdom, its efficacy in our own lives, the power of the presentation of the Buddha's teachings as contained in the Lamrim. This easily navigable collection of instructions that we know reliably, repeatably brings the result of enlightenment. We think that the purpose of enlightenment is principally to unlock our capacity to benefit others. Those kind, whether sentient beings who would otherwise remain in cyclic existence. We generate these minds of confidence based on the understanding of the Buddha and his teachings and the community of practitioners like Lama Tsongkhapa, Lama Yeshe, Lama Zopa, who've deeply, correctly understood his teachings. And we think that the only reason is to be of benefit, to generate the bodhicitta mind. All right. So I believe we're on day 258. So that the quotation from Lama Zopa, when this present life is over, our mind will be blown without choice by the winds of our karma into another life. So this is really, again, just we have a little preview here of the 12 links of dependent arising, which is also what Geshe Sherab is teaching about now on Sundays. The description quotes Pabanka Rinpoche, where he says, our dying thoughts activate the karma that will be the cause of our next rebirth, and the activators of this throwing karma are craving and grasping the 8th and 9th links and the 12 links of dependent arising. Rinpoche says here, meaning Pabanka Rinpoche, the author of Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, that this takes place while the mind is still active and we can still recall virtue or be reminded of it by other people. So that's an important insight, into the dying process and how karma is activated in the dying process, because it is actually a bit earlier on. It's not, it isn't only when the mind has actually left the body that that particular karma ripens. The whole process is a bit more complicated, because it can be that a karmic seed can ripen as it's being described here, kind of a bit earlier on, when the mind, as it says, the mind is still active, and we can still recall virtue or be reminded of it by other people. So, this is talking about, pretty, pretty early on in the dying process, when, because if we look at the dissolutions, the last stages, there's really no access to um, thought that involves conceptuality, and there's no access to sound or sight or anything of that sort in the later stages. Of course, it's still true that a karmic seed can be active at this point, and it may not match up to a rebirth that is open to us immediate, within the first period of the intermediate state. So additional karmas can still subsequently ripen in the intermediate state if that particular karmic seed isn't able to be matched to the right kind of karmic circumstances. But it does initially, at least, it's happening at this point quite early on. And as it says, one of the most critical aspects of making, you could say wanting to see emptiness directly, but barring that, at least making progress in other ways has a lot to do with craving and grasping, which is what, Pabanka Rinpoche is saying here, are what activates the karma. The fact that, as we brought up different places over the course, that for an ordinary person going through the death process, there's a sense of loss, a sense of, perhaps some anxiety, a sense of being separated from what we don't wish to be separated from. And all of that is uncomfortable, and we crave for more of what was comfortable. We crave existence. We think that something kind of real and solid is being dissolved and being taken away, and kind of very similar, I would think, to just the reflex, to the impulse to fight against, say, drowning, or not being able to catch your breath. I mean, those are not things we've all probably had some experience with, being held under a wave, in the ocean, or having the flu, and kind of breathing through a straw, kind of where you just can't really breathe very well, and you panic, in those situations. That's sort of that same impulse, that craving and grasping, because you what in all of the other moments of your life, breathing is easy. Breathing is just, you don't really think about it. It's just there. And then when it's being taken away, it's really jarring, really uncomfortable. And so you fight against that. And, in a deeper way, when we're presented with everything being, taken away, all of our relationships, all of our possessions, everything that feels comfortable, everything that feels like how it has always been. It hasn't always been, but that's how it feels. We only have conscious memory of this one life, and so it's all been kind of one similar experience, and then it starts to move into something very, very different. And so that activates, for an ordinary person, activates craving and grasping. But for someone who's seen emptiness directly, then they really they're able to bring all of that wisdom to bear. And even without that, we can practice the dissolutions. We can develop high levels of meditative concentration. We can get insight into the impermanent nature of body and mind in very deep ways. And all of that's helpful, at least. It's not going to be as powerful as having seen emptiness directly, but certainly, and we can practice with letting go of, possessions, letting go of clinging as it arises in daily life. And all of that are very useful tendencies and habits that we can have at our disposal at this time, even if it's not, the wisdom realizing emptiness. So, what now Lama Zopa is pointing out is that it's incredibly important to have these kinds of antidotes available to us. He gives us a number of different of these supportive, beneficial thoughts that we can try to generate. They say that being able to generate a sense of refuge is very powerful, very protective. So he talks about remembering the guru, remembering the teachings. He mentions renunciation of samsara, which again, will help us to focus on during this time. We may not, if we've not seen emptiness directly, then it is going to be a karmically driven process, this process of rebirth. But to the extent that we can recollect the disadvantages of cyclic existence, then we can reduce at least this impulse for craving more of the same, for thinking, oh well, what was familiar to me is what I want more of. And then, he says loving kindness, great compassion, and the rest. So I'm not sure what the rest is, but all of the other, but so again, when we join renunciation with, as it says, loving kindness and great compassion, then and bodhicitta, which follows on from loving kindness and great compassion, then we start to make it more realistic to be able to think, not may I get more of this, but may I be of benefit. May my next rebirth be whatever is helpful. That's an incredibly powerful kind of mind to be able to generate as we go through the death time. Just, rather than tightly clinging to just this is falling away and I want that not to happen, but embracing, the transition and thinking, well, whatever comes next, may I take rebirth in whatever way is of the greatest benefit. May I be born at a time and a place and with the circumstances and conditions to make use of that for the benefit of others.
Venerable.
Mhm.
I have a sister who is not Buddhist, and once said to me, which was revealing about her, that she said, I'm not afraid of, I know that I'll be able to let go. I'm not afraid of dying, but she said, I'm afraid that my body will want to survive and that I won't have any control over that. And I just wonder if that was what you were describing when you said not being able to breathe, or and that your body has its own grasping, And how do you, I mean, if you haven't realized emptiness, do you just kind of talk your way out of that?
I mean, from the Buddhist perspective, um, they really give credit solely to the mind, really, as being. I mean, there are reflexes, like you hold your breath, naturally and spontaneously when you go under. I mean, there are biological reflexes that happen. Um, But, I mean, it's also true that the breath doesn't generally actually stop until, quite far into the process, and the mind is quite subtle at that point. And um, it seems like, I mean, I don't have I haven't done a lot of research on, but different experiences. And it's certainly true that not everyone has a peaceful death. Some people have you know, quite a thrashing, and but it seems most people do kind of at that point, maybe. And it's different. That can be different things, like um the two aren't necessarily related in terms of um what's happening karmically, what's happening in the mind versus what's happening in the body. Those two, and from the Buddhist perspective, you know they join them to some degree. They um, if we really um, don't make any effort, and we really practice a lot of non-virtue, then then they talk about a lot of fear that might arise, and that certainly is going to make things even worse. Um, so, but yeah, from the Buddhist perspective, they don't discuss any kind of strategies that are related to reflexive biological processes. So it seems like, because everything, is about training the mind. And I guess in the same way that um, if we look at those reflexes, like holding your breath underwater and so on, you can train in being able to do that for very, very long periods of time. Um, and it's true that, like, you have to actually put yourself in that scenario um, to get that particular result. But it could be that by practicing, for example, the dissolutions, that's kind of sufficient. That we, in the same way, we're kind of putting ourselves in that scenario, even though we can't really, and we're not really triggering the same, um, perhaps, reflexes, but we are similarly still creating a really still, concentrated mind that can weather, I guess, those things that otherwise are sort of naturally happening. And of course, I mean, it's not. We also don't have control over how we die. Meaning, like, is it cancer? Is it a plane crash? Is it? And some people, they die at gunpoint. And that has its own sort of challenges, I would think. That um, dying through violence, or dying in a disaster like a storm or a plane crash, that's, I would think, probably more challenging than just being in your bed and kind of going through a relatively calm. So that would likely require a higher degree of mental training to be able to still remain calm and peaceful, even when there's violence, or some sort of natural disaster or something that's happening, a fire, a flood. Those are things that happen to people. And we can't say what's going to happen, to us. So, of course, we can hope that it goes as well as possible. But again, that's, we've used the analogy before of like driving, in terms of the skills that we develop when we just sort of, if we're kind of an ordinary driver, then we can handle ordinary driving conditions. But if we go out of our way and we take classes on defensive driving and driving and seeking out increasingly inclement weather conditions, then even though we may never actually be in a situation where our life depends on having that skill, it's good to have, just in case. So Buddhism doesn't say, well, just be satisfied with a little bit of mental training and a little bit of mental stability. They say really apply as much time and as much effort and, for as long as you possibly can to cover your bases. Because we don't, we just like, it's unlikely that we're going to be put in a situation where some really advanced driving technique is going to be required to protect our lives. It happens. Some people have that or they don't have that. And because they have that or they don't have that, they die or they survive. So.
Thank you.
Venerable, I have a question, please. It's a multi-part question. Would you define mind? Is mind synonymous with consciousness? And is mind in whole or in part our continuity?
So, I don't think that there's a different word for, I think that there are different words that can be used interchangeably, and all of them would be similarly accurate. Mind or mental continuum, or consciousness, as you're saying. But it's also true that whatever that is, has layers to it or levels to it. And you can also talk about those. And so if you're talking about one of those to the exclusion of others, or you're not addressing others, then you're talking about a particular aspect of mind or of consciousness. So Buddhism would assert that we have, broadly speaking, coarse mind, subtle mind, and very subtle mind. And so if you're talking, you can talk about the qualities of mind that are operative or not operative at different levels of consciousness or mental, or the mental continuum. The coarse mind is the mind that we use most ordinary people are using in daily life to speak, to navigate, the world, to, be directed, have goal-directed behavior in waking reality. The subtle mind is the mind of sleep, the mind of meditation. It's the same mental continuum, same mind, but the senses are less and less involved in that, because there's with all of these, there's ranges. It's not like hard we, as we, for example, wake up from deep sleep to showering, that we go through all of these, we move in a constant way through these different stages. And if we exercise and then we hop into bed and then we fall asleep, and then we're going in the same, where the mind is going from coarse to subtle. The very subtle mind is only operative at the, of course, it's always an aspect of the mind, but it's kind of overshadowed by the operation of the coarse mind or even the subtle mind. It isn't like it comes into existence and then goes out of existence. It's just the way that it's like if you have one candle in a room with 100 other candles, you can't really pick out that one candle because there's so much light in the room. But as the mind becomes more and more subtle, it gets to a point where you just have kind of that one candle. It's the only thing that's left. And we call that the very subtle mind. It becomes manifest at the time of death, and only at the time of death, unless you're a tantric practitioner, and then you can cause the very subtle mind to manifest through practice. So yeah, but did you have were you relating that to a different thing or also?
No. So it's just the very subtle mind that is actually our continuum that goes from life to life? Or is it the subtle and very, very subtle?
So what they say is that the very subtle mind is where we is what travels from life to life, and then so that is where the imprints, the karmic imprints, are stored, you could say, or that's reside. That is what is imprinted by karma. But then it gives rise, but then the coarse mind and the subtle mind are all flowing also, from that. Again, it isn't, it's just, so at different stages of our existence, one of those minds is going to be what is manifesting, what is, just like when we're awake, the busyness of the mind is what's operative, but that mind is still capable of very quickly entering the mind of sleep, the subtle mind. The subtle mind isn't something that like didn't exist and then does exist. It's just it's always possible to access that subtle mind once you reduce the busyness of the coarse mind. And then when the subtle mind becomes even further reduced, further subdued, further dissolved into the sort of substrate of the mind, then you would say the mind can't get any more subtle than the very subtle mind. There is nothing subtler than the very subtle mind. Probably sounds cooler in Tibetan, but it's what we have in English, is the very subtle mind. But that's just the mind simply at that point cannot become any more withdrawn or any more um, um, subtle as I may. I don't know any other word to put it. And so when you then move into the bardo, into the intermediate state, the mind becomes slightly more coarse at that point, because now there is perception. Now there's this sort of busyness of the mind is a little bit more active, and so that next moment, after the very subtle mind is manifest, the mind has to, by definition, become more coarse, and then it only travels in that direction until birth, until the next, and then at birth, the mind is coarse because, if we assume like a human, there's crying and there's, thrashing. And so the mind is quite active and the senses are quite operative. And so that's a coarse mind. So it's just kind of, is the mind moving in the direction of withdrawing from sensory data, from interaction, from conceptuality, or is it moving toward being impacted by sensory data, by conceptuality, by, navigating externalities?
Thank you.
So again, Lama Zopa is giving us, more advice on this time. He says, if our last gross thoughts or coarse thoughts are non-virtuous, the throwing karma will be non-virtuous. The karmic seed that ripens is whichever is heavier, the stronger habit. He says, which could have been planted hundreds, even millions of lifetimes ago. If they're equal, the seed that was planted first will be the one that ripens. So with this, he says, if we die with anger or strong attachment, our birth will only be in the lower realms, nowhere else. Generally, attachment causes rebirth as a hungry ghost. Ignorance causes rebirth as an animal, and anger as a hell being. In these lower realms, we will experience unimaginable suffering for an incredible length of time. By comparison, the suffering in the human realm is nothing. In fact, it's like great pleasure, he says. So that's all when we talked, in the module on death, how important it is to, of course, for one, set ourselves up by training, all throughout our lives and purifying as much as possible. And then also trying to have a pleasant external, seeing holy images, hearing the sound of mantra, being surrounded, if possible, by practitioners who are reciting prayers, reminding us of our practices and so on, in order to do everything that we can to cause our thoughts at that time to turn toward virtue, rather than turn toward non-virtue. So then again, day 259, Lama Zopa is talking still about this process, this death process, and giving us more advice on the intermediate state, the bardo. He says, when the mind leaves a dead body, it enters the intermediate state. The form of the intermediate state body is that of the next rebirth. So they talk about this in the teachings on the bardo, that you take a sort of energetic form that resembles the form that you have the karma to take rebirth as.
Venerable, can I ask a question?
Yep.
As like friends, family members, etc., as I just recently had someone dear as a friend pass. She was like 101. so it's, expected. But is there a practice we can do to aid them on their path? She was not a Buddhist. I think she might have been SRF, I'm not sure, but obviously an immensely beautiful heart, so had some practice.
Mm-hmm. So, of course, we don't know, how long it might take for that process of rebirth to unfold. We know that this intermediate state has an end point. It's not indefinitely long. It's presented as not being any longer than 49 days. I don't know why. I don't know if that's definitely, or if that's kind of just a way to energize people to make prayers for a particular length of time, or if that's literally true. I'm not sure. But certainly we know that it must come to an end, because the process of rebirth has to take place. So it's common, for that 49-day period, for prayers to continue to be offered. Once you've gone past that period, then the understanding is that definitely that consciousness has taken rebirth. And again, like I said, we don't know. It could be that it took rebirth within a few minutes of the death, time. Or it could have been weeks later, meaning that the mind entered the bardo and remained there for weeks before finding that. So in some circumstances, if there's a very, very high Lama that you have, access to, you might ask, and you might get an answer, to the effect of, yes, they have taken rebirth, or no, they have not taken rebirth. That, that's not a question that an ordinary practitioner can answer, but high lamas, very, very high lamas can perceive the existence of the mind in the intermediate state or not. And then, of course, if the mind has taken rebirth, then you can stop, any kind of, or at least the types of things that you would normally do. So medicine, Buddha puja, or practice, is the most commonly recommended practice for that period of time. Could be, something that, and of course, it doesn't, the Buddhas don't care whether or not a person is, was Buddhist or not Buddhist. They, they benefit any sentient being equally. So the idea is to try to make a karmic connection between that consciousness and enlightened consciousness through the power of prayer. So once you get past that, the only thing that I'm personally aware of that's thought to be of benefit beyond 49 days is what's called the Jangwa Puja, Jangwa, Jangwa Puja. It's a tantric puja that's considered to be beneficial at any point. Whether a person passed away, 6 months ago or 100 years ago, the Jangwa Puja is considered to be beneficial, regardless. I don't know exactly the role of the qualities of the person leading it. I think that there could certainly be a role. You might want that to be performed by the highest kind of Lama that's, available. That's kind of just generally true. Like, whoever, because, their concentration is better, their bodhicitta is better. There's factors that are involved that could play a role. I know that generally at least a picture for that puja, usually they ask for a picture of the deceased. I guess that helps to the person leading it by seeing that picture helps to create a karmic, imprint of that body. I know that in the past, sometimes it was also, they might, like a clipping of hair, could also be, relevant in trying to create that link. Because, and it kind of flows from the understanding that, that in any form that mind inhabited, that I mean, I don't know if it's like quantum entanglement or, but the mind was associated with that form. So even though the mind and the body are separate, that form still has some relationship forever to that mind. And it's just a question of the method that you use to tap into that relationship. It does have to be this kind of more tantric Jangwa Puja kind of practice, but that's the kind of underlying logic of it, is that the body and the mind, they were intimately connected, and even though that connection isn't the same, anything that is kind of using that form as the vehicle for making that connection still can bring some benefit to the mind that's now somewhere else. But that's the only thing that there could be others. I don't know of any others.
Thank you. I very much appreciate that.
Okay. So then as we said before, within the intermediate state, there are these mini, here they call them small deaths, every 7 days within the intermediate state. So you go into the intermediate state with this karmically established form, but you've only got 7 days to match up the karma that's ripening with an actual rebirth that's possible. And then if those two things don't match, then that form in the intermediate state will experience a death. And then you can appropriate a different form up until 49 days. So generally speaking, the realm is the same. So if you are going to take rebirth as a human, it could be that the details of that are not the same. It could take you. But it's also possible. It's not always that way, throughout all of it. It can be that you've exhausted, those karmas. But oftentimes, and then it's also true that the reverse is also true. You may go into that in a particular form, but then that might be non-virtuous, but then that can shift in a positive direction, generally through the power of prayer. And you can kind of reverse that, and something that would have gone in a bad direction can now go in a good direction due to the power of prayer. And then, kind of at the end of 49 days, again, that's sort of the last. And so, basically at that point, probably you would most likely take rebirth. If you're still there, you're probably going to take rebirth in the hell realm, because like there's nowhere else. I mean, that's the easiest if this karma and this karma and this, none of that worked out, like, that's kind of where things are going to end up. Which is why they make prayers throughout the 49 days to try to shift whatever karma, so that you're not kind of stuck, kind of get to the end and, you've just sort of exhausted everything. Any thoughts or questions?
This might be a strange one. For someone who's not trained in prayer or isn't following the practices of the Tibetan book of living and dying, sending, for lack of any other way to say it, but sending like loving energy, just like literally just love, for an extended period to someone who's passed, is that of any value?
So again, once they're out of the 49-day period, then again, they're, that mind is attached to a form, and they're kind of, I don't know that anything can impact the karma that's ripening in that mind in that particular lifetime, beyond some of the tantric kinds of practices that I mentioned. But if it is during that time where their rebirth is, perhaps not established, then yeah, anything, any kind of, dedicating any positive action toward their rebirth, because you do have a karmic connection with that person. Regardless, anyone that we meet, we have a karmic connection with, and of course, if they are a close friend or family, or someone that we spend a lot of time with, we practice with them or whatever, then that's even a closer karmic connection. And due to that karmic connection, energetically, it's quite good, to dedicate any kind of virtuous actions that you engage in, and think, may whatever positive action I've created, be of benefit to their process of rebirth. But I don't know that in terms of their, I think it's always helpful anytime, in terms of our own spiritual growth and development, anytime that we cultivate positive thoughts. Even, let's say our parents passed away, 20 years ago. I'm not sure that positive thoughts that we have about that necessarily impact like the experience that their mind is presently having. However, by praying, perhaps, like, may I benefit them in a future life, then you're strengthening that existing karmic connection, and then that could help to create the coming together of karmic causes and conditions at that time, or so it could be that you direct your own mind, you're kind of programming your own mind, leveraging your existing karmic connections to be of benefit, to them in the future at some point, when the causes and the conditions, are right for that. And certainly there's nothing wrong with trying to bring sentient beings to the attention of enlightened mind, enlightened activity. I don't know that would, it's sort of an esoteric realm of activity, so it's hard to say. But I don't certainly, and I mean, even if the only benefit is that we become someone who wishes that for people, that's a profound, benefit for our own spiritual growth or development, to want, to wish, for people that we're karmically connected to be free of suffering and to be happy, and whether they passed away recently or passed away many years ago. you know so I would say, if it's in relation to either kind of our own relationship with them in the future, or if it's in relation to enlightened beings, relationship with them, I think those are both wonderful things to do. There aren't teachings that I'm aware of that suggest that immediately, in the moment, that it has the same impact as it does during the 49 days, where, they could, maybe they'll get a lower realm rebirth, maybe they'll get an upper realm rebirth, and you can actually impact that through the power of prayer. But yeah, I mean, it certainly doesn't hurt. There's nothing, there's nothing negative about it. It's only beneficial in some way.
Thank you.
Venerable, there's also a practice called sasur, which is for the dying, for the dead, I should say, and it's a 49-day practice as well, and incorporates the Mahayana concept, because not only are you doing it for a particular person, you're also, in the sadhana, incorporates all those who have died in the last 24 hours. You're not only doing it for all realms and the person that you're directing it to, but also to and the sentient beings who have died in the last 24 hours. And it incorporates the scent. So you burn a little bit of barley flour in that particular practice.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different kinds of pujas and things. There's I don't know, there's a lot of them I don't know. Yeah, it's great. A couple more minutes. Maybe we'll just leave it there, though. Anything else? Any other questions for today? Anything that would be helpful?
I just have a comment that these evenings with you and Felice are really wonderful, and I appreciate them very much. Learn a lot. Great to talk with you all.
Thank you. It's good to be with you all. I really appreciate you as well. I don't have enough words. I just have feelings that don't have words. I'm sorry.
All right. So we will, what's today? Thursday. Yep. So we'll leave it there, and we'll pick it back up on Monday. So we'll end with dedication. Recollect our positive motivation. And think that by having listened and participated, we've actualized that motivation, that intention, generated positive energy in the mind. That positive energy will ripen in the future. We want to direct it to ripen in ways that are spiritually supportive and meaningful, beneficial. So think about how you want to direct your positive energy in ways that are directly related to your spiritual growth and development. All right. Well, have a good weekend. And yeah,